Is Donald Trump a Russian asset? Yes. Read this book, American Compromise. Incredible. Craig Unger. So, an asset is not necessarily a spy. Like a spy is someone that, however maybe they approach the Russians, maybe they approach them, but usually the spy knows, they know what they're doing, they know who they're working for, they are paid, and they're usually stealing secrets or something like that. That's basically Aldrich James. That's the kind of spy we're talking about. That's not what Donald Trump is. He's an asset. He's someone that the Russians have cultivated this relationship with over years and have basically, they understand his personality. They know what would take to motivate him, and that's basically what they do. So when did this relationship start? Let's look at the history, because if you're going to say something like that, we need to kind of show the history and support that. So in the book, the original contact with the Russians was in 1980, when Donald Trump was working on the Grand Hyatt New York hotel. That was his first big project. And during that project, he bought a number of TVs, about 200, from a guy by the name of Simeon Kisling, who is a Soviet emigre, and he ran a store in Manhattan called Joy Lud. So right off the bat, it's kind of unusual that if you're working on a big hotel project like the Grand Hyatt, typically you're going to buy your TVs in bulk from the manufacturer. You're not going to go to some little electronics store, in Manhattan. But he did. So what was unusual about this Joy Lud Electronics that was run by Simeon Kisling? So Simeon Kisling was what they call a spotter agent for the KGB. There were a lot of Russian diplomats, Soviet diplomats in New York at the time working at the UN. It was a big spy hub, and a lot of these Soviet diplomats would buy their electronics from Joy Lud, because the TVs have different electronics that can work in Europe and Russia as opposed to America. Like these TVs that you can use in Russia, you can't use in the United States, and vice versa. The electronics are different. So tons of these Soviet spies, diplomats, would buy the electronics at Joy Lud, bring them home to Russia, and sell them for a fortune on the black market, because back then in the Soviet Union, they didn't have a lot of the electronics that they had in the West. So Trump goes in to buy the televisions. There's another aspect of it. The KGB, because the spies and diplomats are buying their electronics at this store and bringing them home to Russia, the KGB is sort of working with the owner, because the Russians don't want their spies and diplomats bringing home bugged TVs and electronics. So the KGB made sure that the TVs were clean, and they gave instructions to the diplomats to buy the TVs there, not to buy them anywhere else, because it was safer. And Kisling was known, he was working with the KGB. It was one of the reasons why he was allowed to emigrate from the Soviet Union. They didn't just let anyone go. He was what's known as a spotter agent, in addition to running the store. And essentially, he would report back to the KGB, this was one of his tasks, on interesting people that may have come into the store, whether they were Soviets or Americans. So Donald Trump came into the store, bought 200 TVs on credit, and Trump was known to stiff people, but he did not attempt anything like that with Kisling. He paid Kisling at the end of the 30 days, as was the deal. So unusual. Trump goes in. Trump's personality was probably interesting to Kisling, and there we have it. So that's probably the first contact. It doesn't necessarily mean Trump was doing anything wrong in visiting the store, or they already had a connection. We don't know how Trump found Joy Lud Electronics and why he went there, but we know he did.